Africa is no longer just at the table. Africa is rewriting the rules. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we officially begin our proceeding. Allow me to recognize the distinguished leaders and dignitaries who has graced us with their presence this evening. In the room, we are deeply honored to have the presence of our host country representatives from the government of Kenya, our high-level leadership from the African Union Commission. We have visiting state officials and dignitaries representing national governments from across the continent, distinguished members of parliament and legislative bodies, our champions from the civil society organizations and social movements, esteemed voices from academia, research institutions and development partners, and members of the media documenting this historical moment. Please join me in giving all our distinguished guests a warm Pan-African round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, just a quick note on time management. Each speaker has allocated the speaking time, and we want to ensure everyone gets the opportunity. So if you see me standing behind you, don't be alarmed. It simply means I'm giving you a gentle reminder that we are approaching the end of your time. Please help us keep the program on schedule. Now to the welcoming remarks, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to officially welcome us to the 6th African Conference on Debt and Development. It is my distinct privilege to introduce the leader steering the vision of our host organization. She is a powerhouse, macroeconomist, author, global advocate who has spent nearly 2 decades intersecting economic policy with human rights and social justice. As we gather to forge a united front against exploitative global financial architectures, she's here to set our course, to deliver the official welcoming remarks. Please put your hands together for the chairperson of the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, Aphrodite Board of Trustees, Ms. Barbara Kalima Phiri.
Can you hear me now? Yes, absolutely, yes, fantastic. Welcome to Nairobi. They say Karibuni, and welcome to AFCOD 6. Just to recognize the protocols, I want to acknowledge the presence of the official representative of the government of Kenya, fellow of the College of Certified Public Accounts, Dr. Margaret Nyankango, the controller of the budget in the Republic of Kenya. And then we have, I think, Dr. Patrick Omolo, who is joining us virtually, who's the African Union Acting Director, Economic Development, Integration and Trade, and Head of Economic Policy and Sustainable Development in the African Union. Her Excellency Ambassador Dr. Lavina Ramshisun, Co-Chair of the African Union Science, Research and Innovation Council on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Highly esteemed dignitaries, guests of honor representing Government of Kenya, state institutions of other African countries, the African Union, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and then we also have Honorable Kimani, Kuria Chair, Finance and Planning Committee, National Assembly, Raphael Owino, Director General, Public Debt Management, Office of the National Treasury, and then we also have Evans Maturi, Deputy Director General of Economic Diplomacy, State Department of Foreign Affairs. My fellow members of the Board of Trustees, civil society representatives, honored guests, colleagues, comrades, joining us from the continent and beyond, and also those that are joining us virtually. I would not do my job well if I do not recognize our co-conveners, Institute for Social Accountability Kenya, Transparency International Kenya, Institute of Oxfam Kenya, and Christian Aid. It is with immense pleasure and humility that I welcome you all to the 6th African Conference on Debt and Development, AFCOD 6. Many of us, I know that we have traveled from different places, and we've not traveled merely because of the conference, but because we understand that Africa's debt crisis cannot be solved by standing alone, country by country, negotiation by negotiation, and crisis by crisis. So I just want to acknowledge that your presence here at AFCOD is a sign of solidarity for us, and it does show a strong commitment to seeking lasting solutions to what has been a recurrent crisis that has plagued Africa's development for decades, which we know that this is a debt crisis that we're in. I also believe that this is an affirmation that Africa must have a greater say in the rules that govern its economic destiny. Just to remind you that AFCOD was created in response to Africa's experience with the global financial architecture and the urgent need for policy solutions to a system that was never put in place to deliver development to Africa and its citizens, but to preserve the status quo of economic exploitation and subjugation. I want to also mention that AFCOD has grown into a very big baby, and you know that it's now we are AfroDad at 30. Someone told me that although you are a youth, you still are a young adult. So bear with us that we're just 30 years old. But we have grown in terms of AFCOD, from long-standing work on debt justice, including Jubilee 2000 campaign, the work of illicit financial flows, and also now gaining quite a lot of momentum from those who were there last year in Ghana, looking at reparations and all things that look at the global financial system. I think this is a critical moment for us where we are now, because these conversations have now moved not just to talking about the crisis, the debt crisis. We're now looking at how can we support the implementation of all the different instruments that our African Union have passed, and particularly in this case, the implementation of the Common African Position, and that's why we're here. So the big question for me really is that how do we move from speaking about Africa's debt crisis and its problems to building Africa's collective power that would support the implementation of CAP and other instruments. So that is the key question I think that we have before us in this AFCOD 6. Our theme, from fragmentation to influence, recognizes that for far too long, African countries have entered the international financial system largely as individual countries. They've negotiated individually, they've borrowed individually, they've restructured individually, and too often carrying the consequences individually. But you know for sure that creditors are very organized. The financial markets are very organized. The institutions of global finance are also very organized. But why then should Africa negotiate its future in pieces or in fragments? Africa, for me, I think must stop negotiating its future in fragments. Political fragmentation, which has been the default approach by African countries, that has amplified their vulnerability to the global financial architecture, is not simply a diplomatic weakness. It has got a price. And I just want to quickly just put into perspective and show you how the political fragmentation is costing the continent. Africa's total public debt has grown tremendously by 170% over the past decade, and today stands close to $2 million. This is truly unprecedented. Our governments now borrow at close to 10% compared to the United States of America, which borrows at under 3%, even less so for the euro, those in the euro area. This is the same money, right? It's the same markets, priced nearly 4 times higher simply because we are Africa. Today, 27 of our African countries now spend over 10% of their revenue on interest payments. This is from barely 9 countries a couple of years back. Across this continent, 791 million people live in countries where their government now spends more on interest payments than on investments in social services like health and education. So when we look at global debt governance, Africa remains one of the regions most discriminated against. The continent holds only 6.5% of voting power at the IMF, and yet our countries have accounted for close to half of everything the fund lends out since the turn of the century. This arrangement that undermines the demographic strength and potential of the continent, this arrangement does undermine the demographic strength and potential of the continent. This is what political fragmentation costs the continent. This is what I believe the Common African Position on Debt exists to change. I want to also believe that the adoption of the CAP in February, I'm hoping will allow the 55 countries to speak with one voice about the crisis, and also make sure that they can negotiate, not bilaterally, but build that power to negotiate collectively. By the way, it is not the first time that African countries are coming together on this subject. They've done so in the 1980s on the same subject, but the current momentum is not just only urgent, but also leaves us with an obligation to work together and make sure that CAP is actually implemented. I'm almost done. I don't want to bore you with a long speech, but I just want to mention a few points. That it is important to say that a common position is only powerful if it changes behavior. You know, it is only powerful when countries, African countries, can negotiate collectively. It is only powerful when African institutions can coordinate themselves effectively and efficiently. It can only work if and when we change, we balance, we balance power. So a common position cannot become another document that sits on the shelf. It must be an instrument of the African bargaining power. So the question is not simply whether Africa has power. I think Africa has power. We keep saying that. The problem is that Africa has not yet organized its power. And I see that, you know, the Common African Position is a platform for us to organize that power. The newly constituted Borrowers Club becomes that political commitment to drive the implementation of CAP. The African Credit Rating Agency will only have its credibility if and when we can make the decision on how we define risk as Africa. So with all of these colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and our distinguished guests, I think that we can begin to mobilize that power that we already have as Africa and negotiate collectively. I want to also leave you with something more than a welcome. Over the next few days, I'm asking everyone in this room, government representatives, our activists, researchers, journalists, our development partners, to resist the temptation to repeat the arguments that we often make without strong resolve. Going back to do paralysis, is it analysis of paralysis of our problems? We want to move away from that. We will recognize them, we know they are valid, but we do not want to get caught up in that paralysis of analysis. What this week wants is that we want to make sure that we begin to suggest practical recommendations that will enhance the implementation of CAP. I hope that by Friday we can say that we have spent these 3 days effectively. And the key questions are that, you know, how can an African Monetary Institute and a financing solidarity mechanism actually see its day? I think that's the vision that we want to see. We want to see an African Credit Rating Agency and African Debt Monitoring Mechanism become operational and really yield the results that we want. A continent where we cannot have these institutions strengthened is a continent doomed for failure. So I want to see this conference sharpen our push for the UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt, and also plainly put that we want to see that we also interrogate the G20 Common Framework, so that when we get out of here, we have practical recommendations that we can give our governments, we can give our different people that we work with so that we can realize an Africa that we want. In my closing, I just want to take this opportunity to reiterate that Africa does not need permission to exercise its power. It needs to organize it. We must stop this cosmetic reform of financial systems and the architecture that, again, continuously reproduce extraction. And this requires that we have concerted efforts. And I see a lot of colleagues here, our development partners, our researchers, our civil society, our media, all of them rallying behind this. It requires that we support our African government to have that solid position so that they can be able to negotiate collectively. So on behalf of the Aphrodite's Board of Trustees, the Secretariat, and our co-conveners, I'd love to warmly welcome you to Kenya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara, for those warm remarks and for setting the tone for our conference. Now, to share perspectives on behalf of the co-conveners of this pivotal gathering, it is my privilege to welcome a leading voice in Kenya's civil society and public accountability. She is a legal expert, an advocate for transparent governance, and a leader dedicated in ensuring public finance directly serves the citizens. As we unpack Africa's macroeconomic future this week, she brings the vital perspective of local ownership and civic oversight. Please help me welcome to the podium the Executive Director of the Institute of Social Accountability, Ms. Diana Gishengo, and the broader Okoa Uchumi.
Good evening, the great people of Africa. I am not very good with protocol, as you have heard from my introduction, but today, because I am welcoming you to Nairobi, I will do very well on my government side. If I fail on any other protocol, that's okay. And the Honorable Kimani Kuria, the Member of Parliament for Molo and the Chair, Parliamentary Committee on Finance and Planning, my very good friend, Dr. Margaret Nyakango, the Controller of Budget and Independent Office in the Kenyan Constitution, representatives from Treasury, Foreign Affairs, and visiting representatives from the Department of Finance and Treasury across Africa, the chair of Aphrodite, my very good friend, senior and mentor Barbara, and all the trustees of Aphrodite Board, fellow taxpayers across the globe, comrades, Viva Africa, viva! Viva Africa, viva! Where there is food in Kenya, we are not on drought yet. No. Viva Africa, viva! Viva with economic freedom, viva! That is the spirit. By the way, we must raise our voices with our French for now, Portuguese, English, and then we carry our vernacular language to the Paris Club. That way they get interpreters and interpret my mother tongue, your mother tongue, because that is the influence we need to move from fragmentation to influence. From fragmentation to? We are together? Now that is the spirit of this conference. I work at the Institute for Social Accountability, and we convene the Debt Coalition in Kenya, known as Okoa Uchumi. And we are co-convening with partners, Institute for Public Finance, Oxfam, Transparency International Kenya, Christian Aid, who are all members of Okoa Uchumi, but we are over 100 organization because financial and economic matters have become too important for that we must bring as many voices, many actors on board. We've walked a journey with Afrodad, who are our seniors. Tisa is 18. Tisa is 18 this year, so we are an adult, and Afrodad is 30. You're our senior in every respect. We gather here, this being the 6th AFCOD, and AFCODs are always very nice. We may not realize, but we have managed to make tremendous progress. Distinguished delegates, as we welcome you to Nairobi, the pride of Africa, try to beat that, the home of champions, the cradle of mankind. I want to remind you that Afrodad and AFCOD first told us that we must become rule makers, not rule takers. Then they took us on a further journey of reimagining, rethinking, reorganizing, and remobilizing an African world order. I have spoken in other spaces before where people who are very proud of countries that have managed to grow their economies and now are the donors and the people who are supposed to give us debt relief, and reminded them, as you discuss the conditions, reparations and other things will be there, and one day, it will be African states controlling this international financial architecture. If we ever grow together as the United Nations of Africa, and we are the majority shareholders of IMF and the World Bank, and we apply the same rules of SDR, of conditionalities, will the global north survive? I am not too sure. But I think when we are imagining a new order as a continent that has been marginalized, we imagine it as a world order that will be more equal. We then moved to thinking about Pan-African feminist lens when it comes to debt justice, and last year we thought about reparations and reparative justice. Today, we are building on something more important, which is the common African position on debt. We've come here from all corners of Africa and indeed all corners of the globe. If we were to open a session here for therapy, people would share very diverse challenges, very unique perspective. But as we gather here, I am sure that we are all convicted, based on the statistics that Barbara has given, that the development, the dignity of Africans can no longer be controlled by debt. Our survival, who we are, right now is largely dictated and defined by debt. I don't want to give you the gloomy number of, debt servicing is 64%. In Kenya, it's slightly above that. But we are alive and we are still leading in different factors. When we interrogate what exactly is getting us here, and in trying to create a new order that is a bit more equal, that carries everybody on board, we note that debt can never be called sustainable because creditors are paid on time. We can no longer say we are not in debt distress just because creditors, a very small population globally, have been paid on time, yet billions of people continue to lack essential services. That is something that we must now change and work on true debt sustainability that must mean people live in dignity. When you think about it and you compare where Africa is, I don't think we should be a continent in crisis. Because if you think about it, by 2050, majority of the world population will be Africa. And not only will they be Africa, they will be young, energetic Africans. That is an opportunity. That is an opportunity, comrades, that we must seize and see how it gets us to the next level. Similarly, when we are moving to green energy, we are thinking about resources. Which continent still has an fully extracted? You know, they extract resources from us. The continent that still has most resources remains Africa. Therefore, for us to reimagine the future, we must change the fundamentals of international financial architectures. We need to institutionalize the African-led mechanism that can help us to reclaim financial sovereignty by putting into operation the African debt monitoring mechanism, reforming sovereign risk and debt rating systems. Why is there an African premium for debt? What is there? Is there a European premium for debt? Is there an American one? All of us, and luckily, not just Africa, even the most stable democracies have faced storms in the last 5 years. But some countries are even at war. But their interest rate for sovereign debt remains lower, including for countries that are very stable and resource-rich like Botswana. What will it take to change the credit rating that continues to disadvantage Africa? Let us challenge outdated assumptions, flawed global frameworks, exchange viable models across the regions, and strengthen our shared commitment to a common African position and debt. It must become a negotiating position. It must become what our leaders and we, the citizens of Africa, carry to every multilateral space. It therefore means if we are to realize the common African position, as Africa citizens, we have one challenge: to ensure that we bring on board credible Pan-African leaders who will not shy away, who will not retreat to make money, to cut deals, to weaken us, to cause fragmentation, but will dare to lead with courage and vulnerability of knowing the potential that we must get to and get us to where we need to be, the rule makers on international financial architecture. In Kenya, we know that debt and finance is a development issue. It's a fundamental human rights issue. It affects everything that we do. Our goal is economic sovereignty, growth, dignity of the people and generations, and prosperity for generations of the world to come. As you're here and in Nairobi and enjoying who we are, I call you during this period to think about what especially happened to our Pan-African founding fathers who had a dream and a vision so practical. My country says we are headed to Singapore. I dare say that Africa must create blueprints after our own realities so that we can bequeath other nations a heritage to admire. We can no longer, we are surrounded by, I think, 3 oceans. We don't need to cross those oceans. The rivers and the highways in between can bring us together to chart first a vision for Africa and then localize and cascade it in the best way possible to make us the leaders of the world and to ensure we are no longer used on pictures of malnutrition, of disasters, but we are the symbols of hope, the symbols of victory, and ultimately the symbols of human dignity. Karibuni sana, Nairobi. Please enjoy. Do not leave without seeing the Big Five. It is only 20 kilometers. Is it 10 kilometers away? And Siyabonga, Jerejef Ngene, once again, welcome to Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Now, we will now head straight to looking at the conversation on debt, which cannot be separated from broader questions of development and systemic accountability. So to achieve this, it takes an ecosystem of dedicated institutions. We will now hear solidarity messages from our strategic partners working tirelessly across these spaces to shape Africa's financial landscape. To kick us off, we'll hear from the coalition of the absolute forefront of fighting illicit financial flows and championing tax justice across the continent. Please welcome Dawn Dare, chairperson of the Stop the Bleeding campaign.
Thank you very much, Carol. Time being of the essence, please let me ride on previously established protocol to save us time. On behalf of Stop the Bleeding Consortium, which is at the heart of the Stop the Bleeding campaign, we heartily congratulate our member, Afrodad, and proffer our solidarity and our support at this crucial moment. Stop the Bleeding campaign was a campaign we started in 2014, bringing together all manner of African citizen action, registered and unregistered, formal and informal, community-based, national-based, regional-based, continental-based, and some of our continental friends, to initially fight the scourge of illicit financial flows from Africa, and to center it in the minds of our people before taking it to the minds of our policymakers. There are 7 of us, all continental level, deliberately Pan-Africanist associations, most of them being membership-based associations. There's Afrodad, the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development. There's the African Women's Communication and Development Network, FEMNET. There's the International Trade Union Confederation, the African Regional Office. There's NAWI, African Feminist Macroeconomics Collective. There's PALU, the Pan-African Lawyers Union. There's the Tax Justice Network Africa, and there's Trust Africa. So bringing together gender, feminist economics, labor, tax, debt, development writ large, and law together in the service of the African people and of the continent. So we congratulate you, Afrodad. We have seen the evolution of Afrodad over the last 30 years, and we may displaying some of our ages when we say that we saw that. But we have also seen the evolution of its flagship conference, AFCOD, the African Conference on Debt and Development, over the last 6 years, being there from the very first one to this one. We've also seen, as I said, the evolution of the larger Stop the Bleeding campaign, when, as I said, these various groups said, let's come together, work together at the service of the African people, in partnership and supporting and sometimes calling to account African states and also African international organizations at the regional level and at the continental level. So we've been happy to work with the African Union and its regional economic communities on several aspects, including its position on Common African position on debt that we're discussing now, but also previous positions on other issues, on illicit financial flows and so on. And AfroDad has played a crucial role, especially when we're expanding our mandate and our vision from the initial illicit financial flows to look at other major structural opportunities or structural impediments to the economy of Africa, and guiding us as we expanded to put debt as part of the center of what we worked on, and even being an active player where now, as 7 organizations, we're developing our own black paper on the economy of Africa, all the things that we think should be done. So the people's own manifestation or manifesto of the economy of Africa, which we'll be launching tomorrow afternoon, quite poignantly, in the middle of AFCOD 6. One other thing that I will say, time being of the essence, and my sister Diana Nyakoiro Gishengo, having said many of the things I would say, is linking this year's theme and this year's work to last year's theme and last year's work, and that is reparations. And we are quite conscious that there have been 500 to 600 years of looting and raping Africa. First with chattel enslavement and the global transatlantic slave trade, then when it was pretending to reform into formal colonialism as we knew it, and when it was pretending to reform into modern forms of colonialism. So we have an entire world order, and that includes the UN and its Security Council as currently structured. That includes the Bretton Woods institutions. That includes the World Trade Organization, which have been structured on the idea that we took one group of human beings 600 years ago and removed them from being human beings into being property that could be bought and sold. And even when we said we reformed, the post-World War II order, it was still an order built on the subjugation of the black people and the black diaspora in a particular place. So when we were calling for reparations, we are calling for repair of 600 years of harm, and not just the last 60. But we are focusing quite a bit on the last 60 and says, to repair harm, 2 things must happen. First, you must repair yourself and your mind and what you see to be the place in the world, which is why our colleagues from AfroDad keep on speaking about converting yourself from a rule taker to a rule maker. But second, the world must be repaired. And fundamental repair of these 600 years of harm will be fundamental reform of the UN, of the WTO, and of the Bretton Woods institutions. And as my sister Diana said, we are not asking, we are demanding, and we will do. So I really want us to focus on that one, repair of our own minds, decolonize our minds, and create our courage, and then go and demand reform of institutions. And the signs are there. In March this year, led by the president of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, who's the AU champion on reparations, we secured with a massive vote, almost 130 out of the 193 members of the UN, a vote declaring chattel enslavement and historical crimes, other forms of historical crimes, as the greatest ever crimes against humanity in the history of the world. And we are now also in implementation stage of that. And as part of the work on IFFs on the continent, The Mbeki panel that created the IFFs pushed the global level, and we had in 2019 formed the equivalent of the Mbeki panel at the global level, UN FACTI, the United Nations High-Level Panel on Financial Accountability, Transparency, and Integrity for Achieving the 2030 Agenda. And as part of implementing UN FACTI, which was again highly opposed, especially by the states of the Global North and the OECD members, again with overwhelming votes, we are now working towards a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. So we have signs that show us that if we're united, comprehensive, and work hard, we will achieve milestones in our lifetime. So I congratulate our colleagues at Aphrodite, and we look forward to the next 3 days of building the agenda together. I thank you, and I apologize to the interpreters for having gotten over myself and spoken so fast and made interpretation work hard. Thank you, Karen.
Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, the economic realities we face do not stop at the national borders, of course. The challenge of sustainable development and financial sovereignty is a shared continental mission. And here I want to hear from the government officials who are represented here in this room. And we will first hear from the Foreign Affairs representative, Mr. Evans Maturu. He is the head of Economic Affairs and Commercial Diplomacy. Welcome, Mr. Evans Maturu, to the podium.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you can hear me. Am I clear? All protocols observed. I will not really take much time in regard to presenting what I really thought of presenting. But I also just want to indicate that I'm here to represent the Principal Secretary for the State Department of Foreign Affairs. He would have really wished to be here, but he's out of the country. But he has also expressed his desire to join this session, especially towards the closing. So at some point, I believe you should be able to hear his voice. So I'll quickly go through his statement, and then time allowing, I might also just take 1 or 2 minutes to share my experience, especially when in regards to some of these particular processes that I've also had an opportunity of following, especially during my time when I was also a Kenyan delegate to the UN at some point when we were negotiating some of these particular frameworks. But if I get there, I'll quickly go through the statement that I was given as follows. It gives me great pleasure and privilege to stand before you as I joined this special conference. I thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this important forum. The 6th edition of the African Conference on Debt and Development, held today under the theme From Fragmentation to Influence towards Advancing the Common African Position on Debt, provides us an opportunity to deliberate and chart the next steps as we look forward to the upcoming Global Trust Summit scheduled to take place in October in Nairobi. This forum comes around when many developing countries, including a number of them on the continent, continue to face high borrowing costs, weak and uneven access to concessional financing, prolonged and uncertain debt treatment processes, quota-based constraints on liquidity support, and capital market conditions that do not adequately reflect vulnerabilities, resilience, or long-term development needs. The session should therefore provide a timely platform to translate the wider reform agenda into a coherent political signal and a concise set of reform propositions that can be advanced through coordinated Africa development and partner engagement. Africa continues to face elevated debt pressures amidst changing global financing landscape. This includes escalating geopolitical fragmentation, exacerbating debt vulnerabilities, volatility in global commodity and financial markets, protection in policies, declining ODA development assistance, increasing global supply chains, among other global political and economic changes. Therefore, as a continent and as individual nations, we have to take bold steps now to minimize debt vulnerabilities and hence increase the trust levels. The solution lies with us here today, but I will just propose perhaps one or two. First, there is need to ensure macroeconomic stability and strengthening of economic and political resilience from external shocks. Secondly, African countries need to build adequate foreign exchange reserves, ensure low interest rates, and limit excessive reliance on external borrowing. Lastly, there is need to strengthen public investment management to ensure that borrowed funds are allocated to high-return projects in infrastructure, human capital, and innovation. At the global level, there is need for the international financial architecture to evolve to reflect contemporary global realities and align with the development needs of developing countries, especially in Africa. Despite representing over 1.4 billion people, Africa remains underrepresented in key decision-making bodies of the international financial institutions. This imbalance constrains ability to influence decisions affecting its economies and limits legitimacy, effectiveness, and trust in global financial governance. We need a financial system that is more representative, responsive, and development-oriented, that reflects contemporary realities, strengthens African voices in global financial governance, improves access to sustainable and concessional finance, and addresses debt vulnerabilities. So, lastly, on behalf of the government of Kenya, I reaffirm our unwavering support to developing trust within our institutions, as well as management of debt levels for sustained favorable partnership and economic transformation. With that, once again, thank you for convening this noble initiative, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Because of time, I will really not go into the rest of the details that I thought I would have shared, but I also just want to request that perhaps later on, since these particular sessions are running, I might get an opportunity of coming back to share some of the experiences that I personally had when we were negotiating some of these particular important frameworks, like, for example, the journey of trying to establish what we call an intergovernmental mechanism within the UN for the purposes of addressing illicit financial flows, and then also our journey towards the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation, which started, by the way, more than 10 years ago. It has been a very long journey. We've had some progress here and there, and of course, those of you who have been following these particular processes, you do recall the third financing for development framework, that is the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, that made some progress, but at the same time, we are not yet there, because during that particular process, we are able to expand that committee from 11 to 25, but we are now fighting for a commission that has the universal membership, which actually brings together all the UN member states. I really don't want to go through all those processes, but I believe at some point, I will get an opportunity to come back and share my experiences. Thank you.
We now widen our perspective to hear from state officials representing our sister African nations as we work together to build a unified Pan-African approach to debt and fiscal justice. Now, to lead us into these perspectives, we first travel to the southern coast of West Africa to hear from an official representing one of the continent's most dynamic economies. Our next speaker is a seasoned macroeconomist with over 28 years of experience in the economic and financial administration in Cote d'Ivoire. He embodies the excellence of our national training system and state's capacity to produce highly skilled, dedicated technocrats committed to sustainable development. Please welcome to the podium, Sansan Hain, Director General of Economic at the Ministry of Economy, Finance and Budget, Cote d'Ivoire.
Merci, Madame la maîtresse de cérémonie. Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants du gouvernement kenyan, Madame la directrice du Forum et réseau africain sur la dette et le développement, dénommé AFRODAD, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos rangs, grades et qualités, chers participants, chers partenaires. Avant tout propos, je voudrais
Before
remercier
I
le gouvernement kenyan
speak, I'll have to thank
nous
the
avoir
government of
facilité,
Kenya to have given us
l'arrivée ici
the opportunity to
avec
even
la
come
suppression
here
des
with
visas.
you know,
J'étais surpris
the ban of
lorsque j'ai appris
visas.
qu'il n'y
I
avait
was
pas de visa pour
very
arriver au Kenya.
surprised
Là
when
aussi,
I was
c'est des
told
facilités
that I
qu'il faut
didn't need a
encourager sur le
visa
continent.
to come to Kenya. This is one of the actions to encourage in the continent.
C'est un réel plaisir pour moi
It's
de
actually a
prendre la
pleasure for
parole
me to be in
à
front
cette
of
sixième
you
conférence
on
africaine
this
sur la dette
sixth
et le développement
conference
placée sous le thème de la fragmentation à l'influence
fragmentation and influence to progress African communities on debts. In the name of ministers, the Minister of Economy, of Finance, and Budget of Ivory Coast, Mr. Adama Coulibaly, and in my own name, and in the name of who is here with me, I would like to thank AfroDat for this invitation and for this opportunity that has been given unto us to share our reflections on these big issues in our continent. Ladies and gentlemen, the diagnosis that has been presented here were very palpable and were very tangible. This has been actually put in the document of this conference. The African debt goes beyond 180 billion, and this debt has not been used to enhance lives in Africa, and the debt was of a rate of 31% in 2011. For the continent, the debt is no longer a question of finances, but it affects our capacity to finance the development and our economical sovereignty. But this fragmentation of different arms that we contacted. So the heads of states has actually met in a summit in February 2026, and they had some conclusion on the conference of inaugural of African Union that has been held in Lomé in 2025. They actually launched the procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not a new thing. We already have initiatives that we did long ago, but did not carry any fruits. Now, it's time, it's an ideal time for the continent to find mechanism for the finances and the development, and to know how we can tackle see how we can tackle these financial problems that we are having, and have because we have actually two arms of these debts. The first pillar is the structure of the global financial, because of the debt that we have to do some reforms, as the reform that we did in G20, modification of methodologies of agencies, the creation of a convention on the United Nations on debts. We have to create a club of borrowers. We'll have to create a DTS and another platform to participate for the borrowers to participate in. And the second pillar is the African debt structure. We'll have to put in place financial institutions. We'll have to put the monetary institute, African Institute Monetary. We'll have to enhance and mobilize, sensitize national resources for the development of the international market to local currencies. We'll have to see the obligations like the mobilization of the diasporas and see what are their engagement on the climatic changes. Ladies and gentlemen, these two pillars that constitute the issue of our debts. Yes, of course, we don't have the control of the first pillar because these are negotiations that are supposed to be done, and it depends on the borrowers' agendas and the bilateral partners. To actually put in place the situation, allow me to share with you an African proverb that says to never count on the food of your father's wife. And the second pillar is very difficult to achieve. However, this represents the heart of our financial sovereignty. And I wanted to remind the necessity to go deeper. The structures of African Union and of the African banks on this question of debts, and see how the Bank of Development, African Development Bank, can actually help to put in place mechanism and have the objectives that can be related to the structure, to the financial structure of Africa. In other words, the bank should have country strategies. They have to have financial aid on how they can put together financial institute in each country. I know the bank is already financing some programs, but they can go back and enhance and see how these institutions have grown in terms of, availing finances for their countries so that this procedure can be quickened. And this has to be worked on. Different steps should be followed that will actually help African institutions to be enhanced. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to conclude, so I don't be long. Considering the difficulties that we are facing regarding these dates, in this conference, we should not forget the prime of risk, the prime that you've paid, whether in a good way or in a bad way, of the interest that we paid across the weaknesses of our economies that were actually portrayed as weak. We'll have to actually enhance the management of financial institutes of our states. We'll have to know how we can attain the objectives that we've given to ourselves. And to finish, we'll have to enhance the production of food and see how we can answer our economies. These are some of the fundamentals and the viabilities that can help us. I thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we elevate our deliberations on African economic sovereignty and fiscal future, it is now our profound privilege to receive guidance from the highest level of continental governance, To deliver our key remarks by guest of honor, we welcome esteemed leader from the African Union Commissions who are actively shaping the structural, macro, financial, and technological architecture of our continent. Now, as we deep dive into the operationalization of the Common Africa Position on Debt, transforming Africa from a rule taker to a rule maker requires deep institutional expertise and unwavering continental linkages. Now, to guide us through this critical landscape, we are exceptionally privileged to connect with one of the continent's foremost economic minds, joining us virtually from the headquarters of the Continental Transformation. Our next speaker serves as the Acting Director for Economic Development Integration and Trade at the African Union Commission. He is an esteemed economist, a published author, and a powerful voice representing Africa on the G20 Africa Expert Panel. Please welcome Dr. Patrick Olomo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to stand on behalf of Her Excellency, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Forests, Industrial Minerals of the African Union Commission, Her Excellency, Mrs. Francisca Kachobelobe, who would have loved to be with you this afternoon in Nairobi for this very important gathering. Allow me first of all to sincerely thank Aphrodite for convening this 60th of a platform that is becoming one of the most important gatherings on the continent on debt. The theme of this 6th edition is also timely and fortunate because it provides the opportunity to reflect how we can translate the Common African Position into an action-oriented document that addresses one of the most important challenges that Africa is facing today. As was recalled by various speakers, an instrument because it provided an opportunity for us to adopt the Lomé Declaration and also to negotiate the G20, but also during the FFD4, very important milestones that have supported the continent, limiting its voice in the global debt discussion. Later that year, we adopted at the STC the Common African Position on Debt by Ministers of Finance. That was also adopted in February by the heads of state of the African Union. As you can see, we have followed due process to ensure that the Common African Position is a well-accepted document crafted by African Union member states themselves to support Africa's transformation and development moving forward. In that perspective, member states have requested that the Common African Position not only be aspirational, but that it be an implementable tool that supports Africa's transformation, moving from debt sustainability to debt productivity. It is only in that perspective of debt productivity that we will be able to achieve the ultimate goals of the Common African Position on Debt. The Common African Position on Debt, as will be presented to you in the coming days by my team in the meeting with you, you will see that it is a tool that is structured into two pillars. The two pillars are responding to questions that we need to address to ensure that we move from debt sustainability to debt productivity. This is certainly one of the critical documents that has been adopted by the Assembly of the Union, ensuring that we break the vicious cycle that we have seen since the 1970s, with Africa being subject to unfair debt treatment. In that perspective, we are now working to implement the pillars of the Common African Position on Debt. We are working to ensure that the African Debt Monitoring Mechanism becomes effective and operational before the end of 2026. We are also working with the United Nations to ensure that the Borrowers Platform that was recently launched in April 2026 in Washington becomes also another tool that increases Africa's voice in the global debt discussion. It is in that perspective that we are inviting all African Union member states to join the Borrowers Platform and to make sure that we raise our voices to defend our interest in extremely turbulent global environment in which we are today. It was recalled in some of the speeches that the geopolitical tensions today are calling Africa to unite and to make sure that we speak one voice and that we defend our interest in the face of the global turbulences that we see globally. I want to stop here by reassuring you and reaffirming the commitment of the African Union Commission to work with all the stakeholders in the room today, and also with all institutions that are supporting the work that we do to ensure that we break the vicious cycle of debt that we are seeing on the continent. Our commitment has never been so high, and we see this in various fronts. We are working also with all of you in the room to ensure that we transform the global financial architecture to make it more fit for purpose development, and also ensure that the international tax system work for Africa's development. Our ultimate goal, as I said, is to ensure that debt becomes a tool for productive transformation and that our finances serves the purpose of financing Africa's development. With these few remarks, I would like once again to sincerely appreciate you all in the room and voice the need for us to work decisively together to ensure that the Common African Position is absolutely implemented for Africa's development. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick Olomo. Now, if you look at the program, you'll see remarks that were to be made by Francisca Techopo Belobe, who is the AU Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry, and Minerals. And also, we were to hear from Dr. Lavina Rakimsoon, African Union Ambassador and co-chair Council on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, these two, we will hear their speeches tomorrow. We will have a video from Francisca, as she shares her sentiments on this conversation on common African position on debt. Now we move on to the program and look at the distinct, or rather the expert who is an architect of economic policy. He is going to continue with the program from here, but let me introduce him as a certified public accountant, a graduate of Strathmore Business School, a PhD candidate in international business management. Professionally, he managed regional finance portfolios across Africa. Politically, he made history as one of Kenya's youngest member of parliament for Molo constituency and holds one of the most critical portfolios in the National Assembly, rather, as the chairperson of the Departmental Committee on Finance, National Planning. Please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Honorable FCPA Francis Kuria Kimani. Introduce my plate.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. Distinguished leaders from across the region, Viva Africa, viva! Viva, viva Africa, viva! Viva. Distinguished colleagues, honorable members, representatives from the various institutions gathered here, development partners, and most importantly, young legislators from across Africa. I'm very happy to see one of the Secretary General of the Africa Young Parliamentarians Network, all the way from South Africa, who has joined us today. I am the chairperson. It's very good. Karibu sana tena Nairobi, Mheshimiwa. It is a great honor for me to address you on a subject that keeps finance shares across the continent very awake at night: public debt. As someone who has spent years poring over budget estimates, debt bulletins, and revenue projections, I can confirm one thing. Debt is the only visitor who arrives with a smile but leaves with all your furniture in your house. I speak from the vantage point of the Kenya's National Assembly, where I serve as the chairperson of the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning, where I have the privilege, but mostly headaches, of scrutinizing budgets, examining debt reports, and overseeing revenue measures that determine whether our country lives within its means or simply postpones the bill to the next generation. Kenya's public debt currently stands at approximately 13 trillion shillings, which is approximately $100 billion US, equivalent to 68 to 69% of our GDP in nominal terms. This means, ladies and gentlemen, for every 10 shillings that we collect as our taxes, 7 goes to debt. In fact, 3.8 shillings goes to payment of interest and 3.2 to payment of principal. So out of 10 shillings, 7 goes to debt, 3.8 to interest, 3.2 to the principal, and only 3 shillings is left for our recurrent and our development expenditures. Domestic debt, therefore, accounts for the largest share, while external obligations remain significant. Debt service continues to claim a substantial portion of ordinary revenue, narrowing this fiscal space available to development, social services, and climate resilience. Our tax to GDP remains around 14%, well below the level needed to sustainably finance our ambitions. We have, however, made very good progress in terms of through digital systems and compliance efforts. But yet, the structural challenges of a larger informal sector, tax expenditures, and revenue leakages continue to persist. These realities are not unique to Kenya. Across Africa, too many of our countries face elevated debt vulnerabilities. As an economist, one of my greatest authors, John Keynes, once observed, not the famous sayings you know, the one of the most not published, not often well published, is in the long run, we are all dead. In the long run, we are all dead. The problem is that the long run arrives faster for the younger people who will inherit the debt than those of us who contracted it. The most durable path out of debt vulnerability is not more borrowing or softer terms alone. It is deliberate expansion of our domestic revenue base. African countries must treat domestic resource mobilization as a strategic priority. This requires improving tax compliance, reducing revenue leakages, formalizing economic activity, and strengthening domestic industry so that value addition expands the taxable base. This is a very uncomfortable conversation. You know, my counterpart in the National Assembly is the one who chairs the Committee of Budget and Appropriations. The public participation meetings, you know, in that committee are very interesting. Everyone that comes to the committee wants more roads, wants more electricity, wants improved budgets. In fact, I'm looking at the controller of budget, Dr. Nyakango, even when she appears, she wants more budget for the office of the controller of budget. My committee, on the other hand, when you're raising revenue and you mention something called taxes, Diana Gishengo here leads people in the streets. That is how tricky this issue becomes. As the saying goes, in many of our markets, you can borrow your neighbor's ladder, but you must return it before the rains come. Responsible borrowing means ensuring the ladder is used to climb higher, not merely to lean on when the roof continues to leak. What is the role of parliaments in this? Parliaments are not spectators in fiscal policy. We are constitutional actors with three critical instruments: legislation, approval of borrowing, and oversight of public expenditure. In Kenya, our committee has consistently pushed for stronger debt transparency, realistic revenue projections, and fiscal consolidation that protects pro-poor spending. Across the continent, similar parliamentary assertiveness is essential. After all, if you don't ask the hard questions about where the money is going, history has a way of asking them for us, usually at higher interest rates. No single African country can reshape the international financial architecture alone. That is why a coherent common African position on debt is indispensable. We need a unified stance with the IMF, with the World Bank, bilateral traders, and private markets. One that insists a fairer treatment, faster restructuring when distress occurs, and greater weight for development and climate needs. The common African position emerging from the LOM process provides this foundation. Our task, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, is to define it consistently and ensure that national parliaments, and especially young legislators from across the region, own and champion it. Debt, honorable delegates, is not merely a technical issue. It is an intergenerational contract. The young Africans who will inherit today's fiscal choices will live with the consequences long after current decision makers have left office. High debt surveys that crowds out education, health, and job creation, creating investment, is a transfer burden only those least responsible for the decisions that created it. That is why the Africa Young Parliamentarians Network matters. Young parliamentarians bring urgency, moral clarity, and a longer time horizon. They are well placed to demand greater transparency, to scrutinize the quality of borrowing, and to insist that fiscal policy protects the future rather than mortgaging it. As one wise observer once put it, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. The same is true of the public purse. In conclusion, therefore, Africa does not need to choose between development and debt sustainability. We need the discipline to mobilize more of our own resources, the wisdom to borrow only for productive ends, the institutional strength of parliaments that exercise real oversight, and the political unity to advance the common position in global fora. As a chair of the Finance and National Planning Committee, I remain committed to these principles. Let us leave this conference resolved not only to manage debt better, but to build fiscal systems that expand opportunity for the young Africans who will one day judge whether we were faithful stewards of their future or merely the generation that left them with the bill and a polite note saying, good luck. I thank you. And now it is my singular duty to invite the two remaining guest speakers for this evening. And I will start with a Member of Parliament from the great country of Malawi, the Secretary General of Afropac, the Honorable Stephen Malondela. A lot of applause for Mheshimiwa all the way from Malawi.
It feels good when the representative of the people of Moro constituency is here. This is a good brother. I've been to places so many times, the conventional places and the places that we can talk as brothers. We were together in Addis this other time when the late Baba was campaigning, and he championed and he mobilized a lot of young politicians across Africa so that we can move with one voice. He's someone we respect. I see you, my dear brother from SA. We need to catch up and make sure that we're pushing this narrative forward, because Africa shall only grow if we can join hands as politicians together with experts seated in this room. Our colleagues, allow me to ride on the existing protocols, because we've been sitting here for some time since the program was rescheduled. But all in all, we're here on behalf of, I'm here on behalf of Afropac, just to offer solidarity message. So distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, kindly receive my greetings this evening. It is a privilege to bring solidarity greetings to this opening ceremony on behalf of Afropac. When you're talking of Afropac, you're talking of an African organization of public accounts committees. And on its behalf, I would like to send my sentiments, especially to Afrodat. And let me begin by congratulating Afrodat, bringing together these many voices, governments, parliaments, civil society, and technical experts from across the continent under one roof to advance a common African position on debt is no small achievement. It takes a vision, consistency, patience, and dedicated work. Afrodat has done that work year after year, and this 60th conference is proof of it. On behalf of Afropac, kindly receive our congratulations. I am also extremely humbled because when I was listening to Afrodat, they are talking of being in existence for about 30 years. That time I was just a 13-year-old, not knowing whatever was going elsewhere about this. It actually means there is a lot of talk show, much as gains are being made, but there's a lot of talk shows. We need to close these things and make sure that we're registering serious gains as Africa. Because 30 years ago when I was just 13, with no idea that I'm going to stand on this podium and represent AfroPAC, things were being nurtured. So in its infancy, I was a teenager. In its maturation, I have deep-felt belief that we are going to work together and ensure that we register serious gains in as far as gains for AfroDad are concerned. I also want to speak directly to our partnership. In June 2024, AfroPAC and AfroDad signed a memorandum of understanding, a formal commitment to walk this road together. That MOU has made technical support to strengthen how public accounts committees understand and scrutinize data. And an exchange program that has built the research and communication capacity of our own secretariat. This is not a partnership that exists only on paper. It is one we feel in the wake of our committees do, and country by country register gains because of the expertise that we're gaining from AfroDad. Our partnership matters because of what it recognizes, that public accounts committees are not a footnote in Africa's data conversation. We are the institutions that ask, after the money is borrowed and spent, whether it delivered what it promised. Parliaments and PACs specifically are where public accounts and public accountability for debt either happens or quietly doesn't. AfroDad understood that early and chose to invest in strengthening that law rather than working around it. And this partnership has been a two-way street. AfroDad has consistently opened its doors to us as public accounts committees or as AfroPAC, inviting AfroPAC and our members into spaces like this one, where debt policy is being shaped at the continental level. And in return, we have opened ours, inviting AfroDad into our own convergences and to bring your expertise directly to the parliamentarians who need it most. That is what genuine partnership looks like. Not one side extending an invitation and the other simply receiving it, but both of us walking into each other's spaces, deliberately and too often. So as this conference opens, I want to say two things on behalf of AfroPAC. Firstly, I would like to thank you, AfroDad, for your leadership and for treating parliamentarians as genuine partners in this week rather than an afterthought. For that, we say thank you so much, AfroDad. Secondly, AfroPAC stands ready to keep building the capacity of PACs across this continent. Ready to keep this partnership growing and ready to make sure that when Africa speaks with one voice on date, that voice includes the legislatures, that voice includes the people in the village, and that must admittedly hold this and all of us accountable. Congratulations once again to AfroDad on convening us here. We look forward to a productive 3 days and to strengthening this partnership further. With these remarks, allow me to thank you, AfroDad, once again, and thank you so much.
You know, the problem with some politicians, they can't keep secrets. You could just have talked about the many good discussions you have during the day. You didn't have to tell all these people the rest of the evening. So allow me, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you the Iron Lady of the Republic of Kenya, the controller of budget, who fears not to speak to power, even when that power does not want to be spoken to. Allow me to welcome a fellow, my fellow from the College of Fellows of Certified Public Accountants Kenya, FCPA Dr. Margaret Nyakango, the Controller of Budget of the Republic of Kenya.
Thank you very much, FCPA. I also have an issue like Diana with protocols. So you'll forgive me if I don't get them right, and if I just also ride on what was established right at the beginning. As you have heard, I control the Kenyan budget. Maybe not in the manner you may be thinking. I don't have a safe in my office, with the money. But for sure, I ensure that whatever is in your budget is what you get to spend. And that if you spend anything outside that budget, then you better explain yourself very well. Because 3 months after I give you that money, I produce a report. And in this report, I tell the citizens exactly what you did with the money. That is what they don't like, including my colleague FCPA. So tonight, I'm indeed very honored to be here to talk about safeguarding public resources for debt justice. And like many of us who have spoken here, I am directly in contact with debt. Indeed, before I came this evening, I was paying debt. For real. I was making payments of public debt, and it is a lot. As you heard from Mheshimiwa MP for Molo, we are now on 13 trillion and counting. Because just today, the money I used to pay the debt was borrowed. We borrowed domestically to pay internationally. I want to thank the Institute for Social Accountability, first and foremost, because Diana is the one who first contacted me. I want to thank the African Forum for Network on Debt and Development, that is AFRODAD, for extending this invitation and for the trust that you placed in the Office of the Controller of Budget. This year's theme, from fragmentation to influence, towards advancing the African position on debt. So we are moving from the Kenyan position to the African position to compare notes and say, is this what is happening in the rest of Africa? So this topic could not have been timelier. It asks us to move from 55 separate conversations on debt to one African voice. The topic that I'm covering is on safeguarding public resources and the role that budget oversight can play in advancing that common position. I come to this task not just academically or just as an observer, but as a constitutional officer who spends every day working on authorizing, tracking, and reporting on how public resources have been used. Now, the debt that we are talking about may not necessarily have been created by us. It is a burden that has outgrown our institutions. Indeed, I dare say it has outgrown our countries. The scale of what we see now, when we talk of Africa's external debt, we are talking roughly 170% over the past decade. That is growth, from around US dollars 500 billion in the year 2000 to nearly USD 1.8 trillion today for Africa. Our continent pays more than 3.5 times the bond yields paid by the United States. Please ponder that. And roughly 5 times those paid in the euro area for capital that our own development urgently needs. And these are not abstract figures. These are figures that translate into budgets. The average share of government revenue devoted to external debt service across the continent rose from under 12% in 2011 to about 31% in 2024. Again, we are talking of having grown about 3 times. And as the controller of budget, I feel the weight of these numbers directly. Every shilling that leaves the consolidated fund to service debt is a shilling that Parliament has appropriated away from a hospital, from a classroom, or from a county service. Debt justice, therefore, is not just a matter for finance ministers and creditor negotiation tables. It is not an academic affair. It is, at its core, a public finance, management, and budget oversight issue. How about the architecture? And some speakers before me have talked about the architecture of Africa's debt. We really have to be candid about the global financial architecture within which our countries are borrowing. African countries hold only 6.5% of voting power. What that means is that the International Monetary Fund, also known as the IMF, does not really give Africa the voting power, despite accounting for close to half of the fund's total lending since the year 2000s. Nearly 80% of rated African sovereigns were classified as high risk by the major credit rating agencies in 2025. And Diana spoke to this, a classification that our own data does not always support. The continent loses an estimated US dollars 90 billion a year to illicit financial flows. Again, I heard the first speaker talk about this. This sum is nearly equal to our combined annual development assistance and foreign direct investment. Ponder that. 2 decades of debt relief have not matched the scale of this problem. The number of African countries in debt distress or at high risk has risen from about 9 in 2012 to 25 in year 2025. Only 4 countries have entered the G20 Common Framework. At the 4th Financing for Development Conference in Seville last year, the call for a UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt met a lot of resistance from the very institutions responsible for that imbalance. It is against this backdrop that the heads of state, following the Lome Declaration of May 2025, adopted the Common African Position on Debt at the African Summit in February this year. And this is structured around debt restructuring and global financial architecture reform in one pillar, and an African agency and institutional architecture on the other, trying to put it all together. So what do we need to do? I may not have all the answers, but we need domestic discipline for a continental commitment. We need to put this all together as Africa. Allow me to bring this discussion home. Now I'm talking about Kenya and what I do. My office, as a singular and unambiguous mandate, no money should be withdrawn from the consolidated fund or any other public fund unless my office is satisfied that that withdrawal is lawful. This is further grounded in other articles of the Constitution and operationalized through the Control of Budget Act of 2016. My office ensures that funds are indeed secured, public debt involved, and this must be done lawfully, transparently, and accountably. I raise this not to suggest that Kenya has solved what this conference has gathered to address. By no means, we have not. But I raise it because the Common African Position on Debt asks, in effect, for the same discipline at the continental level that we have at the individual country level. Oversight must be practiced everywhere. So the budget oversight that we practice is a form of debt justice. Why do I call it debt justice? Concretely, budget oversight institutions, such as mine, track the quarterly budget implementation, including how the debt service is executed against approved ceilings. I authorize withdrawals only where borrowing and repayment are lawful and within limits that Parliament has approved. I report emerging fiscal risk to Parliament and county assemblies before it hardens into a crisis. And I safeguard the votes that matter most to our citizens. These votes, or budget lines as we call them, like health, education, and county service delivery, from being silently crowded out by debt service that was never scrutinized in the first place. This is what fragmentation looks like, ladies and gentlemen. 55 member states, varying debt profiles, uneven technical capacity, and civil mobilization that too often peaks at conferences like this one. And the parliamentarian here from Zambia, he talked about this one. He said, why do we talk at conferences, but in between, it seems to get lost? Do we really take action on what we discuss? That is a question that we need to ask. Second, and to coordinate, we need to build peer relationships among controllers of budget, among auditor generals, and the public finance bodies that allow us to share data and speak with one voice on debt sustainability. As I stand here, I don't know anything about the Zambian debt or about the Ghanaian debt. I know nothing, but we need to do more information sharing. We need to speak with one voice on debt sustainability. And thirdly, we need to carry the implementation of the common African position on debt forward through continuous, evidence-based domestic accountability, long after the delegates in this room have returned to their homes. As I close, ladies and gentlemen, debt justice will not be won at the negotiating table alone. It will be won or lost in how every shilling of public resource is tracked, authorized, and accounted for, from Nairobi to every other capital that is represented here today. Safeguarding public resources is how we, as Africans, turn a common position to a lived commitment. I wish this conference to have 3 days of deliberation, successful ones, and I look forward to outcomes that will guide our continent from fragmentation to influence. Asante sana, and all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Margaret Nyakango, for those deeply grounding and authoritative opening remarks. That is her opening. And just to emphasize what she has said, I want all of you to take out your phone. Take out your phone. I want you to type Kenya's debt clock. Kenya's debt clock. I want you to do that. How many have done that? Kenya's debt clock. And tell me what you see. Who is Kenya's debt clock? Click on it, click on it, click on that website. Anyone? Great. What are you seeing? Real-time tracking of Kenya's debt. That is a Gen Z who has come up with that website. Her name is Ellen Kawila. She is tracking Kenya's debt real-time. You'll see the Kenyan debt, as Honorable Kuria has said, we are at 13 trillion. You can see how much we are spending, or rather how much we are paying in interest payments. You can see the number of households. So as Kenyans, we are on course in tracking our debt as a country. Now, to give the vote of thanks, but before that, I want to recognize the Senior Debt Management Officer, Reporting and Communications at the Ministry of Planning and at the Ministry, or rather, of Finance and National Planning at Zambia. Senior Debt Management, Dr. Asata Bamwansa. She will be speaking to us tomorrow. You will be having a session. I know you were to be part of the program, but you will have another session tomorrow where you will be speaking on behalf of Zambia and tell us how you are managing debt in Zambia. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude the formal address of this opening ceremony, we look to the leadership of our host organization to anchor our gratitude. To deliver the official vote of thanks, please welcome a powerhouse voice in the Pan-African movement. As a transformative change influencer, she has dedicated her career to conceptualizing and executing people-centered development programs. She's also an accomplished writer and author of Economic Justice, fiercely advocating for the inclusion of marginalized communities to drive systemic policy change. Please join me in giving a warm Pan-African welcome to the Executive Director, African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, Ms. Janet Zol.
Good evening, everyone. And I must say that the moderator makes you wonder if she's talking about you. You sit and think someone else is going to stand up to the podium. Thank you so much for being so generous in sharing the biographies. And good evening, everyone. I would like to observe the protocol that has already been observed. And to say to our distinguished guests, the esteemed partners that we have here, the comrades and friends that are also in the room and that have come for this AFCOD 6, and my fellow Pan-Africanists who are in the room, it feels like I'm in the right place. I'm in the right room. The conversations are right. The conversations resonate with what personally I'm passionate about, with what I know as well personally that Afrodad represents from its founding values and principles. It is my honor to deliver this vote of thanks, of course, to our panelists of the opening plenary, the government officials, the controller of the budget, the parliamentarians who have spoken from different countries, representing as well networks like the AfroPac, our sister organizations, the networks that we have created in order to ensure that we do not keep on moving in a fragmented way, the STB campaign, my sister Diana there, and many others that are going to be speaking in the coming days. I would really like to thank you for your presence and for the contributions that we're going to hear and that we're going to reflect on in the coming 3 days. We are gathering here, as we have heard and as we know, under the theme from fragmentation to influence, advancing the common African position on debt. And already, as I'm listening from this room and also earlier in the upper lecture, I do sense a coming together, a convergence of something that is really remarkable. We have heard from the government officials, from the parliamentarians, the scholars earlier in the upper lecture, civil society voice, the youth leaders that we have in the room, some feminist economists, trade unionists, the labor in the interactions we have had, and the citizens from all across the continent who have gathered here, including some from the diaspora, with a united and single conviction that I've heard and that I keep hearing, that Africa's debt future must be written by Africans as rule makers and not rule takers. And if I may, before I turn to the specific thanks, I would like to name the lens through which I believe the days ahead should be understood. And I've reflected on this, like I said, from the previous interactions we have had earlier in the day. And my reflections and lens are through my very respected comrade, I would say, Audre Lorde, who once warned us that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. In our case, the borrowing instruments of an unjust system can win us small temporary concessions, but never the structural freedom that we seek and we are speaking about. For too long, Africa's engagement with its debt crisis has been conducted using tools designed elsewhere. So talk about restructuring frameworks that we have discussed, we did not write them. Talk about the credit ratings that we have been interrogating and challenging, we did not build them, we do not control them. The conditionalities that we have suffered and we have experienced their impact were never built with our development in mind. So we take this AFCOD 6 as our declaration that we intend to build our own tools using the Common African Position on Debt. We want to build our own tools, we want to build our own house. There is a debt architecture and infrastructure that we are putting in place and moving from fragmentation to influence. What this demands, from what I'm hearing from the panelists over the coming days, is that we are not looking for a better seat at someone else's table, but we want our African-owned solutions, our African-led institutions, and an African architecture of debt justice that we build from our country level, as the controller of the budget in Kenya has said, through to the regional level, to the continental level, through to the global level, where we will seek, of course, for the reforms of the international financial architecture. I know that it is late, so let me once again extend, as AfroDad, our profound gratitude as we begin this journey together. Our guest of honor, our keynote speaker, and the different panelists that are going to lead discussions that are going to provoke our thinking, our Pan-African thinking in the coming days. I would like to thank you on behalf of AfroDad, the AfroDad board and leadership, for lending us your time and the depth of your thought and the courage and conviction to this gathering. We look forward to being challenged to move from fragmentation to influence and from position to power, and my chairperson spoke about this. I would like to appreciate the African Union Commission, as led by Dr. Patrick Olomo and the team, his team that is in this room as well, and all the continental institutions that are represented here. Your presence and partnership affirm that the Common African Position on Debt is not an aspiration. I think that is what we heard. It is not an aspiration. It must be a mandate that we live, all of us as Africans. To our government representatives that have spoken, the policymakers joining us, thank you for the candor and the openness that you're bringing into this space, and for the commitments that you have already made, many of you that you have also committed and are committing to carry back to your capitals and into the spaces that you influence as this conference will end. To our development partners, our donors and sister organizations, we see you. We see the work that you're doing, and we see the engagements, how you're trying to open up spaces for the citizens of this continent to have influence, to have voice, to have power, and to transform that voice into a rule maker and not a rule taker. As we will walk this journey with AfroDad, your solidarity is definitely the scaffolding upon which this conference is built. It has been about that solidarity, about that convergence, about coming together, the people-to-people solidarity, and supporting the cause of this African continent, this our beautiful African continent. I thought, let me thank specifically the youth delegates, because this is a debt and development conference, and I think we heard from our young parliamentarians. I had goosebumps when I heard about the Young Parliamentarians Network, if I heard correctly. And I thought that it's important to really mention them and to thank all the youth delegates and the emerging voices in this room. You are the reason why this work matters. You are the reason why this work matters. Your energy reminds us that this struggle for debt justice does not end just in here in these rooms. It is intergenerational, we had, so we cannot afford not to center youth, young people, women, and all other marginalized groups that we know of. I'm always known about being people-centered, and I would say that debt wears a young person's face, a woman's face, a rural woman's face, a person with a disability who cannot access services when we see the rolling back of the state and all such kind of conditionalities that we have witnessed. So I would really like to acknowledge your presence and your participation. To all the citizens of this continent, the wonderful people that are gathered in this place, I would like to thank you as well for your participation that we will engage with in the coming days. And of course, the people of Kenya themselves, Asante, thank you. I think your hospitality, your security, and the comfort that you have given us, even from the presentations we have had that are so progressive, are something that we can learn from in the coming days. Thank you very much. Every single delegate that is here, thank you. I hope that in the coming days, we will ask sharp questions, we will show up, we will be honest in our disagreements, and we will be able to shape a commitment that will ensure that the Common African Position on debt becomes our power, our voice, our union together. As we have heard and we are opening this AFCOD 6, let us commit over the days ahead, not merely to produce resolutions on paper, but when we leave, I hope that we'll leave with a renewed resolve to organize, to mobilize, and to influence. Let us refuse the master's tools and instead begin here to build the master's replacement. An African house built by African hands on African terms. Let Africa speak with one voice on debt, and let the world begin from this room to listen. Thank you, and have a good evening further.
Wonderful. What an absolute powerhouse of an opening ceremony to launch the conference. Now, please give me, or rather, let's give our speakers a round of applause as we all stand and we say thank you for the work well done and the speeches they have given to us. Let's just give them a round of applause. You've done a great job. Now, that brings us to the formal conclusion of day one of AFCOD 6. Now, we begin this evening, or rather we began this evening by declaring that Africa is no longer just at the table, we are rewriting the rules. And looking at the depth of the vision shared tonight, the ink on those new rules is already drying beautifully. Now, before we transition to a well-deserved evening of rest and networking, we have one most important group photo for our dignitaries. I would request you to just stand. Our photographer would tell us where they'll stand, at the front. All right, you can come down the stairs or the podium. I know I'm standing in between your dinner. Dinner is being served till 10 p.m. But first, we have to take this group photo. Okay. So how do we do this? Okay. Media. All right, the group photo will be done tomorrow. So thank you all for your incredible energy. All right. Oh, okay. All right. Change of plans. All of you to just for the group photo. The dignitaries, you can go. You can. They can. They stay there. All right. Okay. All right. Make sure you can be seen. If you cannot see the photographer, no, he cannot see you. Yes. Look for your space. Make sure you're captured in this historical AFCOD 6. Is there time? Is there time for that? Can you see the camera, or rather the photographer? Who is the photographer? Yes. The photographer. If you cannot see him, move. Amazing. Enjoy your dinner and have a beautiful evening. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp.